So, welcome back to the Square Body project. So, in today's episode, I'm going to refilm all the lost footage that I lost. I don't know what happened to it. I filmed a bunch of this stuff already. Some of it survived, some of it didn't. So, unfortunately, there's going to be some gaps in some of the work, but I'll at least go over what I did. This is going to be completely about the gauge cluster. One of my funny, quirks, I guess, is that even though this is my first LS swap vehicle I've done myself, one of my things that I like having on project cars or anything in general is I like all the factory gauges to work. I know a lot of guys just put those little, I don't know what they call it, they're like an OBD2 little screen on there that gives you pretty much everything the gauge cluster would do, coolant, temp, oil pressure, all that. Some people like putting the big Holly dashes in or something equivalent, or like a race pack. I really like having just a factory gauge cluster, all the gauges working as they should, so everything looks stock. Just kind of how I build things. So with these trucks, there is kind of an easy solution to this. Well, there's two solutions. This is the cheaper, easier solution. The really cool, easy solution is that you can get a gauge cluster from a company called Dakota Digital, or square body specialists who sell their own version of it. There's a Square Body Syndicate, one or the other. I'll link it in the bottom. Oh well. So this is the original gauge cluster here. Voila. Being this was a 1973 truck, it actually had a mechanical oil pressure gauge. So this line ran out to the engine bay. And then no tack. The tack clusters for these trucks are kind of rare. If they had a tack, it'd be here. And then the fuel gauge we move down this spot. Normally this spot's empty on a lot of them. The brake warning lights here on this one for some reason. 73 trucks are kind of weird. There's a lot of things they only did like for 1 year. But this has a cable driven speedometer, etc. It does have an electric coolant temp, and then of course an electric charging gauge. In this case, it's an amp gauge. It's not a voltage gauge. I'm not sure what years they did this, but being this is an earlier truck, it has an amp gauge instead of voltage. So there's that out of the way. Here is the new hotness, and by new hotness, I mean it's out of a truck 30-something years old from a junkyard. This is from a 90 and 91, I believe, are the years. Suburban. This may have been other stuff too. But the key point in this is it actually has an electronic speedometer. And for some reason, in all of GM's wiseness, this actually will run off an LS computer because GM never really changes anything. This also, all the rest of the gauges on this are electric as well. Still no tack because I'm poor like that, but it now has an actual voltage gauge instead of an amp gauge, and as I said, electric oil pressure, electric coolant temp. So there's a few things that have to change, mostly with this connector right here to go from the old gauge cluster. Basically, you switch wires around. There's pinouts online. It'd be too hard to explain here in the video because you have to see what goes to that gauge cluster, what goes to this gauge cluster, but you can make them all work. And there's a few other little things that I have to show you too to make everything happy with that gauge cluster. So I'll show you what I did. Unfortunately, I lost most of the process of it, but basically this video is just going to be about making that gauge cluster work and tidying up a few of the other wiring things. So basically the truck just works like it should. Okay, so one of the other things you have to do is run a different coolant temperature gauge. I think I started to mention this in another one of the videos, but here's the factory sensor that came in the engine. 2-pin, goes in the cylinder head right there. So what you swap it out for is a 1997, I believe it was, Camaro coolant temp sensor. And the key point of this is it's 3-pin. I don't want to unplug it, but you can trust me, it's 3-pin. So you just change the sensor out and then you change the connector out. I'll try and find part numbers and link them in the description. So, and the sensor is like a triangle. So you have 2 connectors and then 1 separate connector. Those 2 connectors that are next to each other are exactly the same as the one you cut off. So you just wire those into your harness like so. This is the one off the PSI harness. Had to cut it off and butcher their harness already. That third wire gets run up to the gauge cluster directly. So I ran another thing up here and I tied it in, goes to the firewall. And so that will actually sync up to the 99 91 Suburban gauge cluster and give you the proper sweep. Down in here where it's hard to see, you can see that gold sensor right there. That's the oil pressure switch. Now that is from a 1987 square body truck, like maybe an R10 or whatever. And that will work on this gauge cluster as well, seeing how it's roughly the same year. It has a spade terminal on top, like a single flat spade, and the bottom of it is a 1/8 inch NPT. So what you have to do is, there's a company called ICT Billet that makes an adapter that goes from the LS thread with that seals with a washer, and it goes to either an 1/8 inch or a 1/4 inch NPT, so you can put in a mechanical or one of these or whatever oil pressure senders right into the factory location. I'll link that in the description too. Like I said, there is a 1/8 and a 1/4. The one I use is a 1/8. What I've seen other people do is they actually tap the oil cooler fitting, which is down there under the headers that you can't see. Down above the oil filter is like a plate. Either you'll have a block off plate there or you'll have oil cooler hoses. Some guys were saying they tap that and they run the 1/8 sensor off of there. But to me, it was just easier just to get the adapter and put it like roughly where it belonged factory. That's kind of where they are on small blocks too. And this sender is the correct sweep, once again, for the gauge cluster. So it will actually read what is displayed on that gauge cluster. And again, I just ran a wire and ran it in with the coolant temp right into the firewall there, along with the fan wiring. So I wanted a cleaner way to mount this Volvo Fan Relay. Before I just had it like zip tied onto the radiator support, or actually it was onto the fan shroud to be exact. And I figured if I'm gonna be fixing this, I might as well fix it right. This is a spare one I had. I have like 3 of these now because why not? So factory, they mount using this little thing on top, like a piece of plastic goes in there and holds it. But I saw they had these 2 like relay like nibs in the back here. So I just made up this little bracket here. It was just an angle. I just notched it around and then drilled these holes in it. And now I can put this on there. It's probably gonna take some force. Oh, there's one. There we go. Yeah. So now I have 2 screws and I can just plop it up on top the radiator support itself, actually screw it in, and it'll be close to battery and I can run the wires over real nice, and then no more zip ties, so I don't look like a complete hack in this case. I made a video about these Volvo fans like a while ago, but figured I was give a refresher because probably no one has any idea what I'm talking about right now with this fan. So in the last video, I showed you that fan was burnt up. Just from sitting outside or sitting around, the bearings went bad in it and it was seizing up. So I can tell you exactly what Volvos these vans are off of. I get them from like a 2000-ish Volvo. It's going to be on like all the models. There's a bunch of those, like I think they're XC90s in the junkyard. I don't know if they just sold a bunch of them or if they're junk, but the local yard's littered with them. So you had the fan assembly, which is in the truck. I kind of trimmed it to fit, but it's just, basically what it was in the car. But what makes them nice is, first of all, they're 2-speed, they're low and a high speed. Then they have these nice little relays that are mounted right by the fan. And this makes the install super easy. So there's a power wire here. This goes to battery power. It's even marked on here. It's a 30 amp draw. So you just put a 30 amp circuit breaker or fuse between this and your battery. And then right out of the fan, there's a connector. This one's cut off, but these two wires go directly into the fan motor. And one of them's a low speed, one of them's a high speed. I can't tell you which ones, I didn't check, but you can just plug it in as is because the fan has this plug already on it. See, it's missing from this one. Then the last plug, the one in the middle, there's two wires coming out. And when either of these wires are grounded, it actually activates the fan. So if you have this contraption in the fan, you're set. You need like nothing else other than some kind of temperature controller. You can use, there's certain BMW, I'm sure other European cars have a temperature switch you can use to ground these. You can use one of those like universal fan controllers that are at like any auto parts store. In this case, I'm going to be controlling it off the ECU in the truck. Before I was using one of those little controllers. But if either one of these wires get grounded, one of them is low speed, one of them is high speed. So you can actually have two different fan settings. And the other nice thing is these fans pull like serious air. I doubt there's an aftermarket fan that is anywhere close to these, and if it is, it's a lot more expensive. The last few of these I've bought, I've been under $20 for the whole setup, like this, the fan, the shroud, everything. So I mean, you're probably getting at least a 3000 CFM fan for $20, or you can go, and buy one from Summit Racing for like $300 or $400. That'd probably be the equivalent. But yeah, so I put the new fan in the truck already. I just gotta clean up some wiring because the way I had it hooked up before was like kind of an abomination. But at least now, once I get all wired up, then the truck should actually be able to run a little bit longer without having to worry about it overheat. Okay, so I mounted it on here. I tidied it up a bit from the kind of crappy wiring I had before, so it wasn't just a jumble of junk here in this area of the engine bay. So here's the power wire, goes down to the motor, and the ground go through there, it loops back up to the fan control relay. It grounds, it goes through a 30 amp circuit breaker up to the battery. This is like the factory truck wiring. And then the two wires that are left, these are the fan triggers. One of these is a low speed, one of them is a high speed. When either of these get grounded, it turns the fan on. Here, I'll put the battery on and I'll show you, see if it'll cooperate. So this is the low speed. And then here's the high speed. Now, if my understanding is correct, I can just hook these up to the factory computer, to the fan outputs, and I should have a low and a high speed fan control, all controlled by the truck computer. I'm gonna run these up this factory like light wiring harness here, up over, and then run them through the firewall. So once these are all tucked away, it should be pretty clean in this area, at least better than it was before. Okay, so under the dash here, the PSI harness came with its own brake light switch. Shocking to me, it fit right in where the stock one did, like perfectly. I don't have an answer for that, but it fits right in. The factory plug even plugs directly into it. So this is like a I shouldn't say two, it has 4 pins, but there's like 2 separate switches in this. So the inner one is your factory switch, so like this will turn your brake lights on as intended. Then it has this second one, and this is for torque converter lockup and cruise control. It's like a safety thing, but the computer actually reads it. The red wire on this gets run to the fuse box, accessory power, so power when you have the key on only. Then this purple wire gets run into the harness to the ECU, and what this will do is when the brake pedal is not on, it supplies power to this. When you press the brake pedal, this disconnects. Then there's another wire that you have to tee into the factory wiring here, and this one actually, when the brake pedal is pressed, it gives power to the ECU. So basically the ECU sees a wire when the brake pedal is not pressed to get power, and then it sees another wire when the pedal is pressed to get power. So then it has confirmation that the pedal is or is not currently being pressed. It seems like it's kind of over-engineered, but I'm sure there's some reason for it. Also, while I'm down here, I re-pinned the turn signal connector, so now my brake lights and turn signals all work, which was handy. If you remember, I switched the column to an unknown year, and this plug was different, but I figured the wires out, put them back in, Didn't cut them, just pulled them out and repinned them back into the proper connector, and now this works. So here is my little conversion harness here. This is the connector that came with the new dashboard, the 9091 Suburban dash. And then I spliced it in here to all the wires from the 73 truck. Plus these are my coolant temp and oil pressure. My fan wires are right here. This harness is the harness that goes to the LS ECU. There's still a few more I have to hook up here. This was like the brake light switch wiring, some other ones I'm getting to. And then I left that one on there. Some people repin them, but yeah, whatever. Here's the one I cut off. This is for the 73 dash. There's a few wires that are unused on both. I think these, like one was like the four-wheel drive light, if it was a four-wheel drive truck when you had it locked in. And I think the other one was like a low charging system, like if your alternator wasn't putting out. That looked like it was overly complicated to wire, and I have a voltage gauge, so I wasn't really that worried about it. And then on the truck side, I capped off a few of these wires. Because this had an amp gauge instead of a charging gauge, if I remember right, these black wires are actually for the amp gauge. Runs power through that gauge to determine if you're charging or drawing amperage. I think this was that extra black wire that I had going down the starter. And then it had a few other like extra illumination wires and extra constant power and extra key on. So I just capped them off with these little connectors here so I don't have to worry about them. But once I finish wiring the few more of these I'm going to use, then I'll be able to like tighten this up a little bit more and tuck it away nice. Here we go. I think I'm done with the wiring. By I think, I mean I'll probably have to tear it apart again. I got all that brake light switch wiring hooked up that goes to and from the ECM and everything. I capped off these extra wires here that I'm not using, the rest of the little ones and stuff. Plugged the gauge cluster in. Also, I switched out all of the lights in the gauge cluster, which are all these little black things. They're a PC 194 bulb. It's a 194 bulb with a plastic base. I switched them all out with LEDs instead of the regular incandescent ones. The ones that are missing are the ones I was talking about I won't be using. The one is the seatbelt warning, because this truck only had lap belts. There isn't even a warning for it. And then the other one's a four-wheel drive light. I actually do have the check engine light hooked up for extra fanciness. I'm sure that'll annoy me later, but I can just turn them all off. But yeah, this should be going in for real now. Okay, here we go. I threw a gauge bezel in just so you can get the full effect. So I'll show you here. We got LED lighting. We have high beam indicator. Turn the key on here. Got turn signals. You can see the gauge indicator or the shift indicator lines right up there. Let's see if it fires up. You can see the gauges do something. Hasn't started in a while. There we go. You got charge, you got oil pressure. It'll take a while, but eventually that gauge, the temperature gauge will come up. I already checked it out. Nothing else really to see because, you know, I'm not driving and I probably legitimately do have like no gas in it. Yeah, there we go. Not too shabby. Well, that should conclude that. I'll have to verify the gas gauge works and the speedometer works, I guess, once I actually start driving it. Kind of hard to test the speedometer on jack stands. Well, I guess I could, but I won't. Also, too, I didn't mention it, the fans actually work. So thanks to Matt for figuring that out properly when he kind of like set the computer up baseline. I need to tweak the temperatures a little bit because it looks like they never turn off at the limit of the thermostat, so the temps seem to go a little bit higher, but it kicks on, cools the truck down, that all works, didn't have to do anything. So yeah, gauge cluster's installed. I know it's something kind of, I don't know, kind of boring and simple, but it's a little more complicated, and now really the only thing left to do on the truck before I can drive it is hook up the transcooler lines and then permanently mount the computer and stuff, and fix a giant hole in the floor. But it's really the only few things left before I can actually drive it. Other than that, it's good to go. But I've been waiting on all that basically to do this gauge cluster first, and I need to figure out where the air conditioning is going to go. So I think that's going to be the next episode, because once that AC unit is in, then I'll be able to know where I'm going to mount like the trans cooler and the computer and such. So yep, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.